Ever try tuning a guitar like by ear and it's just dot off? You get that kind of wavering sound. It's like the notes are like pulse.
That's a real thing. It's a physics thing.
Yeah.
It's called, those are beats. So you're hearing the two strings just a little bit out of tune.
Yeah.
They're interfering with each other.
Beats. Okay, yeah. That's coming back to me. So we're diving into Feynman, lectures on physics, and we're going to really try to unpack this.
Right.
And, don't worry, you don't need like a PhD in physics to follow along because Feynman, he had a way of explaining this stuff that like anyone could get.
He really did. He was so good at that.
Yeah. So these pulsing guitar strings, Feynman would say, we're basically hearing two sound waves and they each have like almost the same frequency, but not quite. It's like things are almost in sync, but not perfectly.
Right, exactly. So you can think of a sound wave, right, as like a smooth, wavy line. And when the peaks and valleys of the two waves, they line up perfectly, you get a louder sound.
Yeah.
But when they're out of sync, they kind of cancel each other out a little bit and the sound gets quieter. So it's that pulsing you're hearing.
Oh, okay. I think I'm starting to see it, but...
And Feynman takes it even a step further. So he says, imagine. Picture these things called vectors.
Okay.
Which are kind of like arrows, right?
Okay.
And imagine two of them spinning around, but they're spinning at slightly different speeds, okay? So the length of the arrow, that's representing how loud the sound is at that moment. And as they spin around, the tips of these arrows are tracing out those wavy lines we were just talking about, those peaks and valleys.
Okay, two spinning arrows. All right, I can try to picture this.
Right. So now, because they're spinning at different speeds, sometimes those arrows line up.
Right.
And so you're basically adding them together. So you get this longer combined arrow, which means a louder sound.
Okay.
But other times, they're kind of pointing in opposite directions.
Right.
So they partially cancel each other out, and the sound gets quieter.
So it's like this dance. They're constantly kind of shifting in and out.
Exactly.
Creating that, like, pulsing effect.
Exactly. Yeah, and you know what? These beats, they're not just a music thing. They pop up in all sorts of places, like AM radio.
Really?
And even, get this, the way that quantum particles behave.
Hold on, AM radio. Quantum particles. Like I said, we're going deep on this one.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
This is where it gets really interesting. We're about to see these beats everywhere, aren't we?
You got it. So let's start with AM radio. Remember how we were talking about those waves, like adding up and sometimes canceling each other out?
Yeah.
Well, AM radio actually uses that to carry information.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
You're telling me my car radio is using the same principle as these out-of-tune guitar strings?
The same idea.
Okay.
It's pretty cool.
Right.
So think about it this way. Sound waves, like from a person talking, are used to modify a much higher frequency wave, and that's called the carrier wave. And it's the carrier wave that lets the signal travel long distances.
So it's like the sound wave is hitching a ride on the carrier wave.
Perfect. Perfect analogy. Exactly.
Okay.
Now, when those two waves combine, they create these things called sidebands.
Sidebands.
Yeah, and those are basically frequencies above and below that main carrier frequency.
Okay, so sidebands, what do they do?
Well, those are key.
Right.
Because your radio receives those sidebands, and it filters out the carrier wave. And what's left is the original audio signal.
Wow, that is so much more complex than I ever imagined.
Right.
I always just figured the radio just received sound somehow.
Right.
But I never really thought about how that actually worked.
Yeah, it's a clever trick, right?
Yeah.
Using these interacting waves to transmit information.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets even more mind-blowing. Remember we were talking about the peaks and valleys of waves? The speed at which those peaks and valleys move, that's called the phase velocity. And in the quantum world, get this, particles can actually have a phase velocity faster than the speed of light.
Hold up, faster than the speed of light.
I know, right?
Isn't that, like, against the rules?
It seems like it,
Right.
That's where this idea of group velocity comes in.
Okay.
So it turns out that the actual information carried by a wave,
Okay.
even a quantum wave, travels at this group velocity, which is always less than or equal to the speed of light.
Okay, I need you to, like, break that down for me a little bit more.
Okay, so imagine like a wave packet. It's like a little clump of energy, right, that represents the particle.
Okay.
The group velocity is how fast that clump is moving.
Okay.
So even if the individual peaks and valleys of the wave, they might be zipping around super fast, the actual information about the particle, that clump, that's still bound by the speed limit.
So it's like the wave is the vehicle and the information is like the passenger. Even if the car is speeding, the passenger still has to obey the laws of physics, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a subtle difference,
Yeah.
but really important. And you know what's even cooler? When you look at the math, it all lines up perfectly.
Okay.
The equations that govern these quantum waves, they show that the group velocity of a particle's wave function, basically it's quantum waves, it matches up exactly with the particle's, regular velocity,
Right.
the speed we'd expect it to have.
So the math checks out, even though the concept is kind of mind-bending. It makes you wonder, like, what other, like, secrets are kind of hiding in plain sight, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Feynman doesn't stop there. He even hints at how these wave equations, the ones governing those speedy particles, how they work in 3 dimensions and beyond.
All right, you've officially blown my mind. 3-dimensional wave equations. We're about to get seriously cosmic here. I have a feeling things are about to get even more interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, 3-dimensional wave equations, bring it on. What's Feynman got for us?
All right, so remember how we were using those spinning arrows, those vectors,
Yeah.
to visualize those beats? It helped us, wrap our heads around waves interacting, in 2 dimensions.
Right.
Well, Feynman's like, okay, now imagine doing that, but in 3 dimensions.
Oh, okay.
Or even more, right?
I gotta say, I'm having a hard time picturing that. I'm trying to juggle invisible cats in my head.
It's definitely getting abstract, right? But the cool thing is, the math still works out beautifully.
Okay.
So Feynman gives us this taste of it with what's called a 3-dimensional wave equation.
Okay.
Basically, this equation, it describes how any wave, it could be sound, it could be light, it could be those quantum waves we're talking about,
Right.
how it would behave in 3-dimensional space.
So it's like that equation we saw before, but with like an extra dimension thrown in?
Exactly. So because it's describing things in 3 dimensions,
Yeah.
it's got an extra term for that 3rd dimension.
Okay.
But the basic structure is surprisingly similar.
So it's like this universal language for waves, no matter what kind of waves they are.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat.
It is pretty neat.
But hold on, we were talking about quantum particles, like breaking the speed of light. And now we're talking about 3-dimensional waves. Like, how does it all connect?
That's the beauty of this.
Yeah.
It all comes back to waves.
Okay.
You see that 3-dimensional wave equation we just talked about?
Yeah.
It can also be used to describe the wave function of a quantum particle,
Oh, okay.
which, as we know, is spread out over space.
So this one equation is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it gets even better. Feynman then drops what he calls the grand equation,
Okay.
which this equation, it describes the quantum mechanical wave function of a free particle. But get this, it combines both relativity and quantum mechanics into one, mind-blowing package.
Okay, even seeing that equation without and fully understanding the math,
Yeah.
it just feels like taking a peek at the universe's source code or something.
Yeah.
It's elegant but kind of intimidating at the same time.
Totally. What Feynman is showing us is that, this one equation sums up so much of what we've been talking about, this
Yeah.
wave-particle duality, right?
Yeah.
The link between energy and momentum, even the speed of light limit, it's all woven right into the fabric of that equation.
It's like those Russian nesting dolls. You open one and there's another and there's another.
Right.
Each layer, you just go deeper and deeper.
And just like those dolls, we could keep unpacking this equation layer by layer and find, more and more profound truths about how the universe works.
Oh, it really is quite elegant.
It is.
You know what else really struck me from Feynman's lectures was that example of the coupled pendulums, where the energy seems to bounce back and forth between them.
Yeah. What a visual. So good.
Such a simple thing, but it shows those complex concepts of resonance and beats.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly it's like a metaphor for how energy flows throughout the universe, right?
Totally.
Always in motion, but always conserved.
And what's amazing is how that simple example it helps us understand far more complex systems, right?
All right.
Think about how energy is transferred between atoms in a molecule.
Right.
Or even different parts of the universe might be interconnected
Yeah.
through forces we can't even see. It's crazy.
It really is. That is a pretty profound thought.
It is.
And a great place to kind of pause for a moment. But, before we get too carried away,
Yeah.
let's bring it back down to earth for a second.
Okay.
For those of us who aren't, physics whizzes,
Yeah.
what's the key takeaway from this whole deep dive into beats?
So we really went deep on this one, huh?
We did.
Started with simple sound waves, and now we're talking about the fabric of the universe.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's amazing how this one concept of beats kind of connects to so much.
I know, right? It
Yeah.
shows you that there's these like hidden connections everywhere, things that seem totally different, like you were saying, like a guitar string
Yeah.
and a quantum particle. They're actually following the same rules, deep down.
It's like Feynman said, the world is a lot more interesting than anyone could have guessed.
It's so true. And I think like by understanding even a little bit of the physics behind it,
Yeah.
we get to like appreciate that wonder on a whole new level.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
So yeah, next time you hear those beats, whether it's, on your guitar, your radio, or even just like in the quiet hum of the universe, like take a moment, take a moment to appreciate it.
Yeah.
That incredible symphony of physics playing all around you.
I love that. That is a perfect place to wrap up, I think, because who knows, maybe those seemingly simple things, those little beats,
Oof.
maybe those hold the key to like even bigger mysteries.
Beautifully. There's always more to discover.
Yeah.